So my role is to get this to be a very interactive session. If all of us agree with each other, it's going to be terribly boring. But I'd like to kind of, if I can, start with some basic questions, and then we'll have a lot of fun going from there. You know, one of the most interesting things about talking to economists, whether it's Dr. Greenspan or people within the Federal Reserve or economists around the world, most of them would say, based on history, you can grow your productivity at 1 to 2% a year. And yet you have companies like P&G, Cisco, and others that leave you in conservatively minimum of 5% growth in productivity per year, aggressively 10%. You can either bring it to the bottom line or apply it to move into new businesses. How do you educate us within this room a little bit about why you believe, and clearly I do as well, that collaboration and the investment in IT really is going to get productivity results? Because Dr. Greenspan would say 1 to 2%, slight bumps above it. We all know we went almost a decade from 2007 to, 1997 to 2005 with productivity averaging in 3, 4, 5%. How do you tie those together, and how do we educate people in terms of what's possible?
Well, I think Alan Greenspan is a very smart guy. He's done a great job of looking at a lot of the numbers, and I think he's benefited from his conversations with you and with me, others, to have more of an appreciation for the role of technology than a lot of other economists. I was just out at the Federal Reserve in San Francisco where we had a conference on innovation and productivity, and I think more and more economists are trying to appreciate this, but frankly, they're trained to spend more time looking at the numbers and less time out in the field looking at the way things are changing, and inevitably that gives you kind of a rear view mirror perspective on things. But over the past 3 or 4 years, my colleagues and I at MIT, as well as people at other research institutions, have started measuring those interactions. For instance, we've been able to get access to the email networks that companies have provided us, so we can see who talks to whom. And by matching that data up with another set of data on individuals' performance, we're getting tremendous insight into what kinds of information flows are correlated with great performance and which ones are just dysfunctional.
With the iPlayer, you all have done an amazing job bringing new concepts to the home faster than anybody thought a traditional broadcaster or BBC would give. Give us your 30,000-foot view as far as what you're doing, what has been the most exciting thing you've done, but also perhaps what have been the surprises.
Well, first of all, let me explain what iPlayer is, because it is something that is very much known in the UK marketplace. It's getting to become more familiar with people outside. But basically, it is the catch-up television service from the BBC that delivers full-length television shows on demand via the public internet. And so, as of today, we are delivering some 400 hours of television programming via a peer-to-peer network to consumers in the home. And on Christmas Day, we launched a new version of this iPlayer product and service, and we will add embedded media and streaming to the mix. Plus, on top of that, not only will we have 400 hours, which is pretty much our entire output, linear output available on demand, we'll also add all of our radio stations to the mix. So suddenly consumers have access to pretty much all the BBC's fantastic output on their terms. When we think about social networking, we think about the challenges that we face with an archive that is 1.3 million hours. So the BBC has been storing all of its fantastic programming since 1922, since we've got established. And so we're sitting on this wealth of programming that today is just not available. In fact, it's sitting in a massive vault somewhere locked away under the ground. Now, the question is, how does an average consumer find what they're looking for and what they're interested in an archive that is that vast and that big? And so we think that the power of the many, the social element of it, will start to help with things like recommendation, personalization, and ultimately, the BBC even believes that, this is pretty radical I think, is that the user will become our #1 distributor.
So the user, in essence, begins to build the search type capability based upon the social networks and the balancing within it.
Correct. Yeah, so we think that a combination of social networking, and the names were dropped a minute ago, of Facebook, Avivo, and MySpace, where people share their experiences, where people share what they like with their group of friends, combine that with a recommendation engine, and you probably have something that can allow consumers to truly discover new sorts of media that, frankly, they weren't able to discover in the linear format that we're so used to today.
One of the most challenging positions to take is when somebody asks you to come in and set a whole new strategy. And Filippo, you know where I'm leading with this in terms of the CIO and collaboration. But I'm going to ask Erik first. When you came into BBC, one of the kisses of death is to say, figure out what our strategy is and convince all of us who can resist change that we ought to do it. How did you survive that? Was the instincts already there that BBC did not change, they wouldn't survive? How much of it did you have to educate people? How much did they already know? And why have you been so successful in that role when very often companies, organizations do that, especially those that have been successful? The person who, quote, comes in to set the strategy and shakes it up ends up being the one that gets left out.
Yeah, in my case, I was fortunate that the antibodies of the organization didn't come out when I proposed some new strategies. But I was also very fortunate that the people who were there had a lot of vision already, and there was quite a bit of thinking going on how the BBC would become digital from all the way from the camera, from the first, from glass to glass, basically, as the old guys, the old saying with Sony goes, from glass to glass. They're working on that. There's hundreds of millions of pounds being invested so that by 2012, the BBC shoots directly to solid-state memory, and everything is digital. Now, having said that, it is a public service organization, and for me, moving in there from a highly commercial organization like Microsoft was a little bit of a shock therapy, I guess. But the main thing that the BBC was missing was a focus on delivery, a focus on shipping product, a focus on being iterative and learning from your mistakes. And instead of building a Rolls Royce, or I guess in the States one would say Chevrolet, build a small, tiny thing, get it out, learn from it, and be iterative. And mainly that's the secret to the success here.
What we're really looking at is the growth in terms of loads on networks, especially as it relates to video, perhaps from 2007, 2006 to 2011 going up by a factor of 4-fold. Is this too conservative, way too aggressive? What would be your prediction, realizing I know how hard it is to predict the trends, because if it grows up 2 times, that's more than what industry experts would have said just a year ago. What do your instincts tell you, and what do you see in the BBC that would probably, if you had to make the bet, where would you bet on the network load growth?
Personally, I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg when it comes to video capacity on the internet, usage of video for distribution there. I think mainly today it's been driven by illegal peer-to-peer services, user-generated content, and short-form clips. But increasingly, big organizations, big broadcasters, copyright holders, and startups are starting to make video available in full-length form and in all its glory, whether it is the BBC through the iPlayer, Hulu, whether it is Apple, or startups like Juice. So I think we're just scratching the surface here. And if I just look at my own shop, and if I look at our own numbers, right now the BBC's entire online activity is on a rate of around 1.3 petabytes per month, and about 2/3 of that is made up mainly by audio only, audio streaming and podcast downloads. It's already quite interesting by itself. Now, as we launch iPlayer in December on the 25th, we expect that number to just go up by another 500 terabytes initially, a year per month, that is.
Wow.
And a year from now, our predictions are that we will be, for just for iPlayer, and this is audio and video, up to 3 petabytes per month. Now, if I add our news operations to that, all the clips that they're going to do using embedded video technologies, Our current predictions and projections are, well, they may be somewhat optimistic, but we're building for this sort of volume. Because we're looking at 5 petabytes per month about a year from now. And now, add to that.
That's 1 year from now.
Pardon me?
That's up by a factor of 4-fold in 1 year?
Yeah, that's right. That is correct.
Who do I talk to about selling more routers for you to do again?
Well, that would be a good start.
Thank you.